Vantage. It's a name with a lot of pedigree and a lot of history. But when it comes to the modern era, the last version at least, didn't have quite the same impact as its predecessors did. Why that was? Well, it could be a couple of things. Not everybody liked the way it looked. Some people said it didn't have enough power. And though the interior was very interesting, it was really not that modern. So what has Aston Martin gone and done? Well, for 2024, they've gone and fixed all of that. This is the brand new 2024 Aston Martin Vantage. Just look at it. Some would call this a massive facelift. Others would say it's a new generation. You tell us what you think down in the comments, but I think it's somewhere in between. The revisions are similar to those that turned the DB11 into the DB12, including an uprated engine, new chassis components, and a completely new interior with the latest tech. But that's not what gets your attention first, is it? The big change is really up front, the new face, and in my opinion, the most successful part of this update. It starts with the new Aston Martin badge that's a little bit larger and a slightly different design. Then there's the grille. It's 38% larger for much better cooling. There's a lot more sculpture to the bonnet, and then you'll find these DB12-like larger, taller headlamps with the 6 LED signature. Down here, this is interesting. It's actually an homage to the 177 supercar, and it is functional because it lets in air. It's an air curtain, which brings me around to the wheels. These are designs borrowed from the DB12, 21 inches front and rear. That's the only size you get. Now, that air that gets let in, it comes out through these vents here by the signature Vantage side straight. Apparently quite tricky to engineer functionality into a design feature like that. And down here you'll find this huge side sill that you might clip your ankle on the way in or out. Be careful of that. Up here, it's borrowed the pod-like wing mirror from the DB12, which, like that car, very cool. The whole pod moves to adjust the mirror, not just the glass. That is stationary. It also houses the surround cameras in the stock over there. Now, moving to the back, admittedly, things haven't changed too much, but because the car is 33 millimeters wider, you can really see that in this chunky rear wheel arch. The tail lamp arrangement, largely the same, but down here you'll find a bigger, more aggressive diffuser and larger tailpipes, and that's something customers seriously asked for. But what do you think about the new Vantage looks? Let us know down in the comments. I absolutely love it. Subscribe to the Autocar India channel if you like this car, give the video a thumbs up, and click that bell icon to stay notified. Ground clearance on the spec sheet is listed as just 94 millimeters, though it's unclear if that's the laden or unladen figure because it doesn't look that low, and we didn't encounter any issues here in Spain. Interestingly, though the boot is not objectively huge, its lift-back opening does make it more usable than the one you get in the DB12. Ironic, as that is meant to be the long-distance cruiser while this is the two-seat sports car. And on that note, we've got to talk about the interior. Did you see that? That was the classic Aston Martin swan wing door coming down at a slight angle, and it's such a great design feature, but also might save your door from getting curbed if you're not too careful. But once you're in here, you start to see why the Vantage is every bit the sports car that they mean it to be. Here in the interior, you can see that in the way you're cocooned by the dashboard, which I think in terms of design, my personal opinion, it's a little bit more cohesive than the one in the DB12 even. It's come together really nicely. Quality is absolutely superb, and you can see what they've done with the Q catalog in this blue carbon fiber effect that I think is just superb. The big news, of course, is the new Aston Martin in-house developed E&E architecture that includes this 10.25-inch touchscreen and the 10.25-inch digital dials. I like that the dials have a little bit of a housing this time. It makes it look a little bit nicer in terms of design. It's not like the DB12 just sat on the top there. And this is at a nice low place where it doesn't interfere with your view, and it's also quite easy to access. They've also made sure that you have enough physical controls for just about everything, and I'm so happy for that, because in a car like this you need to focus on the road and not on your controls. The touchscreen itself, super slick, super fast, but as with the dials, I feel like the size is just a tad too small, or rather the graphics are a tad too small. They could have been a little bigger, easier to hit and easier to read while on the move. Maybe that's something that can come with a software update. The steering wheel is new too, and it's got a couple of signs of old Mercedes like the stalk over there and these touchpads, but aside from that, it's a very nice shape, it's nice to hold, and the controls are pretty easy to follow. Another move is these paddles from the steering column down to the steering wheel. I personally prefer it that way, but I know a lot of you don't. Let us know down in the comments what you think. And then we get to these seats. These are the middle grade seat. They are the sport seat. Below this is the comfort, which is the base seat. And above it is the performance seat, which is what we're going to experience out on the track. I like these. They're a good mix of comfort and support, and they are also heated and ventilated. In terms of storage, not a whole lot, to be honest. There are two very small cup holders over here and some rather shallow door pockets, and yes, a glove box. If you're wondering where the wireless charger is, it's down there. And as you can see over here, the seat controls are on the center console. All things considered though, I think it's a triumph of design and really makes you feel involved and want to get driving and driving fast. The new look and feel are transformative for the Vantage, and if we're being honest, for most sports car buyers today, that's more than half the job done. But Aston Martin says the improvements to the performance package are, if anything, even more significant. So before I can go out on the road in the Ion Blue car you saw just now, I'm going to hop into this Podium Green example for a few quick laps of the Monte Blanco circuit. And unlike when Nikhil was here with the Taycan last month, today the weather is nice and sunny. Immediately, the first thing you need to know is that because this is the sports model, not the GT model, unlike the DB12, it doesn't have a GT mode. They've just thrown it out altogether. The drive modes start from sport. They go sport, sport plus, and then race. Also immediately apparent, very early on, is that this car is way more agile, not just than the DB12, but also than the old Vantage. This is thanks to a significant increase in stiffness at the front and rear axles with new, stronger cross braces and underfloor stiffening too. These combine with a more responsive steering and new generation Bilstein adaptive dampers that have a 500% greater bandwidth and sharper reaction times to make the new Vantage ridiculously darty. This is technically a front mid-engine car because the engine is all the way behind the front wheels, and that's certainly apparent in the way it rotates around the driver. 50-50 weight distribution because the gearbox is at the back. And all that effort that's gone into making turn-in sharper and more responsive is immediately felt. 665 horsepower. Yeah, it's doing about 250 down the straight as we brake in corner one. A quick word on the gearbox, which is a newer generation of the 8-speed ZF torque converter automatic compared to the previous Vantage. As we've seen in the past, it offers a good mix of low-speed smoothness and aggressive high-speed shifts. Quicker still thanks to a shorter final drive. But on the track, I did notice it was sometimes reluctant to downshift close to the limit, where rivals with dual clutch boxes would have no such problem. Also, for as powerful and agile as it is, at 1,745 kilos, it's on the heavier side of the segment, and you can feel that out on the track. The Monte Blanco circuit, like many of our circuits back home, is not super smooth. It's got quite a lot of bumps, which is why the Aston Martin engineers recommend that we keep this car in Sport or Maximum Sport Plus. They said race is just a little bit too intense for the surface of this track. And I tend to agree. The power delivery is just so sharp. It's such a far cry from its original state of tune. Do you think we've come from 510 horsepower in the previous Vantage to 665? What a leap! But as the guys at Aston Martin say, they're not just concerned with having the biggest number in the segment. They also want to make sure that it feels right for this car. Because if you think about it, right now all three Aston Martins, the mainstream front engine models, use the same engine. 4-litre AMG Source V8, and they're all within about 40-45 horsepower of each other. The DB12 is only 15 horsepower more than this. But it's the character that varies from model to model. Whoa, whoa! This car is the most agile and most angry version I've seen yet. And that really makes sense. I suspect Aston Martin knows that ultimately a 911 GT3 RS would do lap times better than this. So they've worked instead on making it feel good. Smart move. That said, this is not the final Aston Martin Vantage. As with the previous model, it's likely that we'll get an AMR version. But more than the elevated power figure, it's really the agility that leaves the lasting impression on you. If you really enjoy driving, it's all about the sensation. And what Aston Martin seems to have done here is deliver something really unique with the Vantage, despite it sharing so many mechanicals with its siblings. How is this the baby of the range? Incidentally, the race mode I mentioned earlier is actually called track mode, as I found out later, so my apologies for that. And though Aston didn't recommend it for this particular track, I had to see what it was like. So after I was done filming, I went out again to try it. And I see why they asked us to hold back. It's a huge leap ahead of Sport Plus, with far sharper throttle response, more aggressive damping, and the traction control at its most liberal. In fact, you can choose variable traction control with as many as 9 settings. After a few laps in track mode in those stiff carbon fiber performance seats, I came away pretty knackered, but in the best possible way. A quick break later though, it's time to get back to the blue car and go for a drive away from the freedom of the racetrack and out in the real world. I think perhaps even more so than out on the racetrack, the new Vantage has to prove itself here on the road. That's not just in the general sense, but also in the Indian context. Because yes, while some sports car and supercar owners take their cars to the track, the majority of them will drive them on the road. And you must remember that this is the base Vantage now, even though it makes so much more power. And there are more track-focused versions to come later. So this one has to do the job of being really great on the road. So is it? Let's start with all the stuff I'm not so sure about. I kinda do wish they left a GT mode in for this car because yes, while I know it is a sports car, what's wrong with a little bit more comfort when you need it, right? And in a similar vein, the fact that it's restricted to just one wheel size, 21 inches, you can't go up or down, could be a problem in a place like India where the roads are not so great. If you wanted a smaller wheel and larger tire, for instance, can't have it. 21-inch wheels, different designs, but the size remains the same. But that out of the way, let's get on with it because this remains an absolutely stunning car to drive. Let's begin with that noise. It's not even in the loud exhaust mode. I can do that now. subtle, but it makes a difference. And I asked the engineer, does this pipe in audio through the speakers? And he looked at me kind of weirdly and said, really? Do you think it needs to? And he's right. This is au naturel. And because you're sat so close to the exhaust box, it's just right there, you're not too far from the rear axle itself, you can hear it loud and clear. When it comes to the drive mode, yes, you'll want to use Sport for 90% of the time. But if you do want to turn up the wake, Sport Plus is not too far a departure. It's not like race mode, but it does heighten things up just a little bit to add a bit more enjoyment. And if you're in the mood and you're willing to put ride comfort and things like that aside, that's the one you got to go for. I really like the compactness of it, the tightness of it. It feels like a flexed up muscle at all times. Loads of power just raring to go. Lovely V8 soundtrack accompanying it at all times. And in Sport Plus mode at least, really sharp responses. It's a funny thing, when the DB11 became the DB12, they widened its range of abilities. With this, it's kind of the opposite. They've focused them. The DB12 became more of an all-rounder. This has become an even sharper sports car. You have to hand it to Aston Martin. They're really onto something when it comes to better defining these two cars, the DB12 and the Vantage, that are all too similar in formula. You sit 10 millimeters lower in the Vantage than you do in the DB12. And while that doesn't sound like a whole lot, you kind of can feel it when you're out on the road. It's more of a cocoon feeling, less of a commanding one. And that's just as well in what is meant to be the sports car of the range. What also surprises is that in such a small and low-slung car, the view out is not terrible. Yeah, the windows are slim, and those wing mirrors that sit in the pods are also tiny, but because the glass area is so large in these tiny pods, you actually get a pretty big view back. So what about that powertrain? Have they gone too far with the increase in horsepower and sharpening of the responses? Well, I think it's just about manageable. If you keep it in Sport and not Sport Plus, you get that good balance where it's got responsiveness if you need it, and it can be a gentle cruiser if you don't. It's not quite as smooth as what you got in the DB12, but that's just as well, I guess. What you're hearing right now, and I'm having to talk over it, is a really rough road surface and these wide tires, the 275s up front and 325s in the rear, do make quite a racket in the cabin. It doesn't feel like this car is as well insulated as the DB12 was. And that's just the thing, isn't it? Despite all the similarities to the DB12 on paper, the Vantage, for better or worse, is more vividly defined than ever. It's a sharper sports car, it's more powerful, and it now has an exterior and interior worthy of this segment. Speaking of which, its most obvious rival will no doubt be the upcoming Mercedes AMG GT, but also the Porsche 911 Turbo S. And these improvements have made the Vantage far better equipped to take them on. Trust Aston Martin to do things differently. While every other car maker is trying to separate its models from one another, Aston Martin has used basically the same formula for its two cars, the DB12 and the Vantage. Same platform, same engine and gearbox, and same technology. But somehow, through the power of design and engineering, they've managed to make the two cars distinct, have their own individual character. But in the Indian context, at 3.99 crore rupees, it's still very expensive, and in fact, just 60 lakhs less than the DB12. But I actually think it's the more convincing of the two Astons. It's got the drama, it's got the charisma, and oh boy, does it look attractive. Think of it as 95% of a DB12 for 60 lakhs less. I think it's an absolute stunner and an absolute star for Aston Martin. What do you think? Let us know down in the comments, and thank you for watching.